Hey everyone, Wazoo here, and this is a special episode. Alright, I'm really excited. In this episode, we are going to be going through an entire to-do list application from start to finish, all using Spring Boot. This is going to be really great, y'all. Before we get into it, I'll demo what we're going to be building today. Zoom that in a little bit. Alright, so what we have here is our home page, and we've got a list of two to-do items that are colored amber when we still haven't completed them yet. We've got an ID for each generated from our database. We've got a description of each, a creation date timestamp, and a modified date timestamp. So when you create a new issue, you'll see the current date that gets used, and whenever you modify or update the issue, then the modified date changes. So let's go ahead and edit one of these items. So we'll hit the edit button, and so we can change the, let's see, we're in Canada right now, so let's shovel the snow. Hit update, and we see that our record gets updated along with a timestamp of right now. And then let's go ahead and delete one. It gets deleted. We can add a new to-do. Let's see, finish recording this to-do video, and hit add to-do, and we've got this newly generated record now. And we can now, if we edit it and hit the complete checkbox, hit update, and then suddenly our to-do item turns green, just signifying that we've completed our to-do item on our list. And it's an easy way to tell what's left and what we still have to do. I've also got a little bit of text here. Happy Monday. I'm recording this on a Monday, and so this will just dynamically generate the local day whenever it is you're visiting this web page. So that's about it for this app that we're going to build. There's a lot of little pieces there that are all put together, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait to go through it. Let's get started. Now that we've gone through what we're going to build, let's take the necessary steps to get ourselves there. As with all my other projects, the source code should be in the description down below. It should be up on my GitHub repository, hopefully either before this video is posted or very soon after. But as with other Spring Boot applications, let's get started at start.spring.io. So we're going to be creating a Maven project, of course, using Java. And in this application, at this recording, we're going to be using the latest release, which is 2.7.0. And for our group name, we're just going to be using com.wazooinc. And then our artifact is going to be Spring Boot to do application. Okay, so I won't bother filling in a description. Maybe I'll change it later. Package name, sure, whatever, looks fine. We're going to be using a jar file. We're going to be using Java 18. And then let's get started adding dependencies. So we'll hit the add button. We'll be grabbing the dev tools, and we'll be grabbing Lombok. And then we'll be adding Spring Web and Spring Data. Okay, I could actually search for that. Okay, where'd that go? Spring Data JPA, and then we'll be using H2. There's a validation library. I wonder if, oh, there we go, validation. Okay, we'll be using the validation library as well. A lot further down the road, but you might as well add it right now. Okay, let's hit that, smack that generated button, and let's extract this to hard drive. Okay, so first things first, I've extracted this to my hard drive, and I'm in the same folder now. And as you can see, we've got our typical standard generated files that we get when we create a new project with start.spring.io. So what I'm going to do is right away create this as a Git project. So we've got an empty repository now there, and I'm just going to add everything and make the first commit. Initial commit. Hurrah! Okay. Hopefully that's legible. Okay, that might be a little bit better. So as you can see, if I scroll up, I typed in git init to initialize the repository, git add dot in order to add everything that you're working on, so every file that hasn't been committed yet. And then I committed it with a message of just initial commit. Okay, so now let's open Visual Studio Code. And it should have a nice and ridiculous font size here. I've mentioned this in my other Java videos, but I do have the Spring Boot. Let's look at the extension right now because I keep forgetting the name of it. And just in case this is the first video you come across of mine, in which case, thank you very much. It is the Spring Boot Tools. Is that, oh, Spring Boot Dashboard? Yeah, Spring Boot Dashboard. That's what I've got. And the Spring Boot Tools. I think the Spring Boot Tools has everything installed. So it comes with a bunch of the sub extensions with it. Anyways, let's go back to our Explorer. Typical start.spring.io setup here. What I'm going to do is move my face and hopefully, well, we'll see how this goes. Maybe I'll go to the top right here. Sorry, just trying to find a place where I can kind of hang out with you guys as well as actually do something productive here. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we are going to open our application properties file, Control-Shift-O on Windows. And this is our main Spring Boot configuration setup file. And so what we're going to do is we are going to be setting up just the very basics of our H2 database. That's the database that we're going to be using for this project. It runs locally. I just find it easier to prototype and debug with it via the H2 console that gets exposed, but we'll go through all that. So what first we're going to do is, just for fun, we're going to declare the port that we're using to be 8080. It's 8080 by default, but we're just going to explicitly say it just to help out. Okay, so set up server port to be port 8080. I'm just going to make sure everyone can see me here. Okay, good. I have to check my other monitor to see if my head is not covering everything up. Okay, so set up local H2 database properties. So what we're going to do is spring data source.url. We're going to be using a file database. So there's a specific incantation that we have to put together here. I do look this up. I do have to Google this every single time that I do a Spring H2 database setup. So don't feel bad if you have to. I definitely haven't memorized this. There are lots more useful things to memorize than how to set up an H2 database locally. Okay, so we're going to be using an org.h2.driver, check. Okay, and then our username is just going to be admin, and our password is going to be admin. Nice and easy to remember. You can make it whatever you want, and this will come in handy when we're looking through at the database through the H2 console. Okay, and then so finally we have JPA database platform equals org dot hibernate dot dialect. I mean, how's anyone going to be memorizing this? It's inhuman, I say. All right, and then we want to set up some properties for our H2 console, which I will show you very shortly. Okay. Let's get this all defined. So spring.h2.console.enabled equals true. Nice. And then spring.h2 console. By default, the path is h2 console as I'm writing here, but it's just it's just good to know. So if you ever want to change the path, or then you'll know where to change it. And then there's another configuration option here called web allow others. So basically, do we allow other machines to connect to this this one running in order to look at the admin console, and I'm just going to say false. I believe by default it's false, but again, in case you're running a local LAN or something like that and you're totally fine with other machines going into your Spring Boot H2 console into the database to look at the data, then this is how you would change it. Okay, and then what we want to do is we want to set up local database tables on startup. So this would be another incantation: hibernate DDL auto equals update. So basically every time we start up the server, it will attempt to create the database if it hasn't been created, or create the tables, sorry, if it hasn't been created already. And then let's see. Let's do one more here. So let's allow, there's a setting here to allow DevTools restart support. So let's just throw this in. DevTools restart enabled equals true. Okay. Save that. All right. So now if we start this thing, let's go ahead and start it. We should see our log file come up here. And so the server started on port 8080 as we're expecting. And we have created the database here, right here. H2 database, H2 console available at /H2 console, database available at JDBC H2 file data to do app. So far so good. So what we can do now is let's go ahead and let's look at the H2 console. Okay, so let's type in localhost 8080, port 8080, and /H2 console. Okay, again, I'll just increase the font a little bit. Okay, so we've got the driver class org.h2.driver. That should be auto-populated. You shouldn't have to touch that. But just in case, here it is. For the JDBC URL, remember it's a file URL, and we saw the path show up right in our logging. Let me try and pull that back. Right there. So see, we can just cut and paste this JDBC :h2 :file :dot/data/ to do app and copy it right into our console settings right here. And then our username is admin and our password is admin. So let's go ahead and connect. And ta-da, we see the database. So right now we're not creating any, we haven't created any tables, nothing like that. So there really isn't much to look at, but this is how we would get into it. So I'll just leave this tab open and we'll come back to it as we add data. Nice. Okay, so let's shrink that down a little bit more and let's hit stop. And let's see, step one completed. I did forget to mention, my apologies, I forgot to mention that I will be putting timestamps down. There should be timestamps appearing in this video. So I'll be listing them down below in the description, as well as you should see them on YouTube, how YouTube does the auto timestamp calculation stuff, which is actually pretty nifty. Okay. So first things first, let's set up a welcome page. So first before that, okay, we're going to be adding this application setup to Git. So again, let's go back to our Git console and if we say Git status, it'll show us which files have changed. So you can see that we've modified our application properties file, but now we see our data folder showing up in there. And I don't want to commit the actual database because it's going to be different between, from machine to machine. So when you check this out, you don't want my existing data coming down with a project. You want to be using your own. So let's go back into our Visual Studio Code and we'll add it to our ignore file. Let's see, right here. Let's ignore the data folder. And now if we go back into our command prompt and type in get status, we should just see, there we go. So let's add both, git add dot, and then git commit, setting up h2 config. There we go. Okay. Now let's go back and add our controller. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding a we're going to be adding the home page. So I'm going to be calling this in Java com/wazooinc/todo application. I'm going to do a right click, new folder, and call it controllers. And then I will be creating a new file and calling it todo item controller.java. Okay, so Visual Studio Code will automatically put in the package name as well as the the class name, which is great. Okay, so what we're first going to do is we're going to use the annotation to declare this as a controller, and then we are going to be bringing in a logger. We'll set up a logger. That way we can try and help ourselves track what we're trying to do here. So todo item controller dot class. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we are going to create a get mapping for the root. So slash. Whoops. Oh no. Sometimes I type a little too quickly. Okay, so what we want to do is a public model and view, and we'll just call this index, call the function index. So what we want to do is create a model and view object, model and view equals new model and view, and for our initialization parameter you give it the name of the template that you want to use for the view for this function. So in our case it's just going to be index, and for the moment we are just going to return that. There, done. So let's fix these. Let's see, control dot. No, I don't want to import. Yeah, there we go. Import controller, and I want to use logger factory from SLF4J, and logger will be logger from SLF4J, get mapping, import mapping from the Spring Framework bind annotation, and then oops, model and view index. Okay, let's just call this logger, and let's see, logger.debug root page. Let's just call it root page. Okay, request to get index. How about that? That's a little bit more helpful than root page. Okay, so we've got our controller here, and let's go ahead and save it. And then let's also add we need to add a template. So in the source / main resources folder, under templates, let's go ahead and create one called index.html. And this will be our home page, our start page, the one that I demoed in the application. And yeah, so then what we're going to do is we are going to give it a doc type of HTML. We're going to give ourselves a HTML header there. I might just cut and paste some of this in because it's not very exciting watching someone type in HTML. Okay, so then we're going to be doing a HTTP equiv equals. So as you can see, we've got the doc type defined, our open HTML tag, closing HTML tag, our head, our open head, closing head. We've defined some meta elements. Really the only important one is this char set equals UTF-8. And then underneath head we'll just add the body, of course, and let's just create a welcome message. Okay, and that is it for our template. So let's go ahead and restart our application. Okay, and there we go. We've got our welcome screen. Now we're cooking. Oh, can we blow that up a little bit? Okay. Now we're cooking. So let's go back and let's commit this. I commit everything to source to Git. So we added the controllers and the templates. So let's just go ahead and added what, index template. Okay, so we've got a controller which then pulls up the index HTML file, which then gets sent to the browser when we request localhost 8080. So we are doing great. Okay, now let's go ahead and why don't we create an actual model. So let's go ahead and stop this. And let's go to, okay, let's close up those. Let's give ourselves a little bit more room. Hopefully I'm not in the way here. And let's go back to our source Java.com Spring Boot Todo Application, and let's create a new folder called models and a new folder called repositories. Might as well do both at the same time. Okay, so models, we're going to be creating a to-do item model. So under models, new file, and to-do item.java. And we'll leave it as a class, and we will declare it with a entity annotation. Okay, and then let's go into table. Let's see, table name. We'll just declare it with a table name equals to do item. This part's purely optional. It doesn't really affect how Spring Boot JPA calculates your database table name, but sometimes I just like to define it explicitly. That way it makes it easier to come back to. Oh, okay, I'm looking at my recording and I can see I'm covering things up. So let's go into this corner. Maybe that's easier to follow. Leave a comment down below what position, what corner of the screen you like me in. And even if it's nothing, maybe you don't, if you maybe prefer not seeing my face. Okay, so let's do a annotation of ID and a generated value of, whoops, strategy generation type auto. Again, this is incantation stuff that I always have to look up. So getter and setter from Lombok, and finally declare an ID field. So let's go ahead and control period that. We want to use JavaX persistence. We want to use ID from persistence. Okay, that all looks good. Okay, now we also want a description. So let's declare a getter, setter, and then private string, whoops, string description. Okay, and then let's create a boolean to track whether things have been completed or not. So getter at setter, and then private boolean complete. Okay, let's see what else. Let's do some dates. I did have 2 dates, so I'll be using the Java time instant classes. And if you ever want to have a good time, just Google up setting time with Java, and you should come across about 40 different date timestamp things that you should be using. And so it's a lot of fun picking the right one to use. So let's call this private instant created date, and then a getter setter for a modified date. Okay, so far everything looks all good. Okay, we'll do an instant, and we'll import the instant from Java time. Okay, that all looks good. And then we'll create an empty constructor override. Well, not override, an empty constructor method, as well as a constructor method with just a description. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be setting the description to the description that gets passed in. We are going to be setting complete to false. By default, this created date equals instant.now, and this modified date equals instant.now. Okay. So whenever we instantiate a to-do item with just a description, then it'll fill in the rest of these fields. And then finally, let's create a override toString method, so that when we want to log a to-do item to our log file, then the log file knows how to print out and display our to-do item. So public string toString, and then let's return string format to-do item ID equals %d, description equals %s, complete equals %s, and then let's do created date equals %s, and modified date equals %s. Close that up, and then let's fill in all those fields: ID, description, complete, created date, modified date. Whoops, got an extra bracket there. Okay, that all looks good. And then just because we are using JPA, we also have to fill out a empty repository, or declare a repository for to-do item. So under the repositories folder that we just created, let's create another new file and just call it to-do item repository. Okay, and this one will be a interface, and it will extend the CRUD repository of to-do item and along. And that's really all we need right now. So import CRUD repository, and then import to-do item from models. Okay, that all looks good. Let's tighten this up a little bit. Okay, excellent. Looks good, everything looks good. And I think this step is done. So let's now add let's go back to our controller. You know what, let's just run this. Let's run the server just to make sure there's no errors upon startup. Just to make sure I didn't do anything weird. Okay. So now to test this out, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be updating our first let's go back into our Git. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to update our controller, and we're going to be pulling in all of the to-do items that are in the local database and then displaying them on the screen. Now, because in a lot of applications, when you're building a web application, a lot of times what you want to do is, in order to test out your data layer as well as referencing that data layer all the way up to the view, is you often find it useful to have something called seed data, which you haven't come across the term before. It just means data that's in the database that gets populated when you by the application itself when you start it up, and that way you've got some data to work with to verify that things are set up kind of the way they're supposed to be set up. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's create this seed method. So within the JavaCom Wazoo Spring Boot To-Do application. I'm going to be creating a new folder, and I'm going to just call it config. And then within that, I'm going to be calling it a to-do item data loader. Okay, we'll leave it as a class, and we'll declare this as a component. That way Spring Boot recognizes it upon setup, and we're going to be implements a command line runner. Okay, so let's go ahead and final logger equals logger factory get logger, and then to do item data loader dot class. Okay, and then now what we want to do is use the auto wired annotation, and then declare a reference to our to do item repository. Let's do that, and then we want to override the method that we have to override with a command line runner object, sorry, and that is public void run string args throws exception. Okay, and then what we want to do is call another method called load data, and then within load data we want to create, so if the to do item repository count equals 0, so basically if we're starting off with an empty database, then let's go ahead and create 2 new to-do items. And remember that we have a constructor override for a description. So let's call this one get the milk, and to-do item 2 equals new to-do item, and rake the leaves. How about that? Okay, and then what we want to do is we want to save them. So we go back to our to-do item repository, and we save to-do item 1, and we do the same thing and save to-do item 2. Okay, and then what we do is control dot on these to import the items that we need. Okay, everything looks okay. Oh, logger, we want to use logger factory and import logger from SLF4J. And then what we want to do is logger info number of to-do items, and then we'll just call this to-do item repository count. There. So upon startup of our application, Spring Boot will come across this object with this component annotation, and we're implementing the command line runner, so it'll then run this when all of the Spring Boot objects are created and instantiated, but before we actually see anything. And so this will run, and this will load data, and then within the load data method, we can call it anything we want. We can call it load seed data if we want. Maybe we'll call that load seed data. Let's make that a little bit more helpful to follow later on. So load seed data, and then we're going to do a count of our to-do item repository, and if we have no items, then we're going to create two new to-do items, give them both a description. We're going to save both of them into the repository, or persist them, sorry, not save. The same idea, but anyways, that's what's happening, is it's persisting. And then in our logger output, we're going to just print out the number of to-do items that are existing in our database during this startup. So let's go ahead and hit Control S, and then let's start this up. And let's see what we can see in our log messages. Okay, so we started up the Tomcat server. We're on port 8080. We've started the to-do application, and then right away, we see a info message with the number of to-do items to be equal to 2. That's pretty cool. Okay, so now let's actually display those in the screen. Okay. And what we're going to do is we can leave the server running. So let's go back in the controller, to-do item controller. And so after we get the get index, we've created, remember, we've created the model in view object. So now let's go ahead and let's add a reference to our repository, auto-wired private to-do item repository, to-do item repository. And then, okay, let's resolve that. And then let's go ahead and we are going to be adding all of the to-do items and view add object, and we'll call this to-do items and to-do item repository find all. So when we come to this page now, when we come to this controller, we're going to be pulling all of the items out of our database, and we're going to be adding it to a list object and create it with the key name of to-do items and then throw it into our view. So that way in our view template we can reference this collection under to-do items and then enumerate through them, iterate through them, however you want to say that, iterate through them and display their properties to the screen. So that is our next step. So let's go ahead and stop that. What I want to do first is what we're going to be using is Bootstrap. Bootstrap is a nice way. What we're going to be using is Bootstrap. And Bootstrap is a nice way to easily prototype what you want to create in your application, but give it a little bit of a friendly UI to kind of look at when you're trying to demo what you're working on. So Spring Boot has a concept of WebJars, which is a way of pulling in the whatever front-end framework you want to work with from Maven into your Spring Boot application. So if you go back into your POM XML file and just go down to the bottom of your dependency list that gets created during project setup, we're going to be adding two new ones. And I'm just going to cut and paste them in because it's so much easier than writing them all out by hand. So I'm going to be adding a group ID of org.webjars, Bootstrap, and we're going to be using 3.4.1 for this. It's a little bit on the older side, but I just want to display the to-do items to the screen. Feel free to use whatever version you want. Maybe once we're finished the application, update it, or maybe I will go in later on and update it myself in a future commit. And we also want to pull in jQuery 3.6.0. So for a dependency, a group ID of org.webjars, jQuery 3.6.0. So when you save this and when your project pulls in these WebJars, we can then reference them from our index template. So let's go back into the index template, and I will show you if we let's do this, cut and paste. Okay, so we're using a front-end markup language, or a front-end markup package from Spring Boot called Thymeleaf. I'm not quite sure how to say that. Thymeleaf. And so you can really tell you're using Thymeleaf when your properties start with a th:. And so one thing we're going to have to do up here is we're going to have to also declare namespace off the HTML tag, calling it th, and then we're referencing thymeleaf.org. And so this is the same th here that we use in our Thymeleaf lingo for our markup down here. So if we called this something like tf, then if we declare this as tf here, then we also have to update this reference here with TF. So I'm just going to leave it as TH, and we're using the rel equals style sheet, and then the href is we're referencing our WebJar, Bootstrap 3.4.1, which is our version, CSS bootstrap min.css. And that, I mean, that's almost the same path that you have to use when you're referencing it, when you're referencing Bootstrap from something like npm. Okay, so down here at the bottom, before the end body tag, let's go ahead and include the JavaScript files that we need. And so same idea. We've got a script with a th source, thsrc value of ampersand / WebJar / JQuery 3.6.0, and we're referencing the JQuery min JavaScript file as well as the Bootstrap min JavaScript file. And then let's get rid of the welcome tag and let's create a div with the class of container. And hopefully there is some good timestamps here so you can skip through some of this typing because it's not really too important. But let's go ahead, and what we want to do is we want to have a title. So we're using a class called a CSS class that Bootstrap provides us called text center, and then we're just going to call this to-do list. And then we'll create a horizontal rule, and then we'll go through and create a table. And so I'll cut and paste the first bit of it, and let's end the tbody table, and we'll go through that in a second. But we're basically creating a Bootstrap table here, a bordered table, striped rows. We're giving it an ID, but we're not really referencing this ID anywhere. You know what? Let's just go ahead and kill that for now. So our column headers are, let's leave out actions for now. We'll add that in later. Our column headers are ID, description, is our to-do item complete, our created date, and our modified date. So now in the tbody section, let's go through and go through the process. Sorry for all those Visual Studio Code hovers, everyone. They seem to come in every time I move my mouse. So let's go ahead, and what we want to do is we want to go through each row. Each row of our table represents one row of the database, or one row of our to-do items list that we declared in our controller. So see this to-do items list. So that's what we're going to be working from in this front end. So we have a method of Thymeleaf called theach, which is used to iterate through each of them. And so we have an item, and we use a colon, and then a $, bracket to-do items. So the to-do items is the array, is the object name, the key name that we've given to this array. And so that's how we declare it here. Item is the representation of what gets the object that holds the single instance, the current single instance from the to-do items list. Okay, so then what we'll do is we will open up a row, or a column, sorry, td, and then we'll use a td th text equals, and then we want to pull out the ID of the item object, and we'll put it as the text in this column, sorry. And just to have something, this is a reminder for us, this item underscore ID never actually gets displayed. You'll see what gets displayed when we print this out on our web page. So apologies if this seems a little bit confusing now. So we do the same thing, th colon text equals $, item, description, and then we just call this item description. This can be anything. This text never gets displayed. I'll show you which text. And then we've got the complete. So item.complete. Oops. Let's see. And then we want to display what's after complete. The created date. So td th text equals $ item created date. And close that off. And we will call this item created date. And same thing with modified date. So let's just cut and paste this. And we'll call this modified date. Okay. And that's it for this row of the table. Now let's go ahead and start this up. Okay. So everything looks okay. We see our number of to-do items too. And let's go to our browser, hit refresh. Whoa, and we see a to-do list. Nice. Okay, so let's shrink that a little bit. Let me check the recording. Oh, let's move myself up here. Okay. So as you can see here, I've got a description. My mouse is just underneath the bottom of my box. Sorry, everyone. So I've got a description, an ID, description, complete, created date, and modified date. And then I've got get the milk, false, and then date timestamps for the created and modified date. So far so good. So this proves that our seed data works okay, that our database is set up correctly. Let's look in our H2 console quickly here. So back in our other tab, we've got the H2 console. We'll have to hit refresh just to make a fresh connection to the database. So just reload the page, and it'll force you to re-authenticate. So remember, the login and password is admin. And now we see, oh, yoink. Now we see a table of to-do items. So if we click on that, automatically some SQL will show up on the other side here, and we'll just run it. So select star from to-do item, we run it, and right away in the bottom we see that we've got some our seed data in here already. So our ID, our complete, created date, description, modified date. That's pretty cool. So notice how created date and modified date both have the underscore. So if you'll recall, back in our model, we gave a variable name of modified, a mixed case variable name of modified date and created date. So when Spring Data finds that and it's creating the table, it sees that it's a mixed case, and so what it'll do is it'll automatically create the column name as an underscore with when it comes across the capital letter here. So if we had created this as say last modified date, if that's how we declared the variable, then the actual column name would be last underscore modified underscore date. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so the data's in there correctly. Everything looks good. So now what we want to do is let's first commit this to Git, and then we will go on to editing, adding, editing, and deleting, basically everything else. Okay, so I'm going to hit the stop button here. Let's see, and let's add all this. So we've got our to-do item, our repository. Okay, let's close all that up. All right. So now what we're going to do, okay, I'm back in the right corner here. Okay, so now what we're going to do is go back into our view, and we're going to create a column called actions, which, if you'll recall from our initial demo, was just allowing support for editing and deleting. So within each row, we are going to we are going to give us a way of editing the current to-do item in that row, as well as deleting them. Okay, so we're going to be creating two links. We'll be using a button info, so it'll appear blue, and a href will be equal to ampersand /edit/id, where the ID is equal to item ID. Whoops, and yep, that looks correct. And then we'll close it off, and we'll call this edit. We'll call that link edit, and then we'll do another similarly delete link. So button, a CSS type of button danger, button and button danger, and then href equals ampersand squiggly brackets /delete/id, where ID is equal to the current item ID. And let's close that up. Whoops. And it's very hard to type things legibly with this giant font staring at you. Okay. So we've got two buttons now, an info and a danger button. One is edit, one is delete. And when we click the edit button, we'll be passing in an edit path along with the ID of the current item ID that we're looking at. And same thing with delete. This will maybe make sense once we fill in the actual method. So we've now got two endpoints that we're going to be throwing into our controller, which is /edit and /delete. So what I actually want to do is, instead of using the to-do item controller for that, I want to put these into a to-do form controller. So basically create a new controller to just deal with the form methods. This will make more sense as we kind of fill this out. So back in our controllers folder, let's create a new file and just call it TodoFormController. And it'll be the controller annotation again. And let's go ahead and create another logger reference just in case we need it. Logger factory, get logger, and then TodoFormController.class. Okay, and let's get a reference to our to-do item repository. Okay, and then what we're going to be doing is, let's start with a logger factory, and then logger. Apologies for all these pop-ups. It's very disorientating. I know, I can imagine it must be disorientating to watch, but it's also disorientating to work with when you're trying to type something in. I've been trying to figure out how to disable those hovers like this from Visual Studio Code, and like these giant hovers, and I just can't seem to find a way to not have them pop up, so apologies. Okay, but back to the point. We're going to be using a get mapping here, another annotation, and remember how we called it edit/ID. So this is how we're going to process editing a to-do item. So we're going to create a method called let's see, show update form. We could call it show edit form, but whatever, show update form. And we've got an annotation path variable because we're passing in the ID within the path. And then model is always being passed alongside a Spring Boot template. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to look in our repository for the to-do item corresponding with the ID that gets passed into this method. So let's call this to-do item equals to-do item repository, and then we want to use a method called find by ID, and then pass in the ID. And then if we don't find it, or else throw, and we want to throw a new illegal argument exception, to do item not found, basically. So to do item ID, to do item ID, and then let's pass in the ID, whatever ID was passed in, and then not found. So basically like a 404. Okay, let's end this. Everything looks okay there. Model. Whoops, what happened? I accidentally commented this out. I'm telling you, these giant font things. And my fat fingers on the keyboard. Okay. I believe we're using Superboot UI. Okay. So we've got a to-do item. We want to import that from models. Show update form case. So we have to return a string. So we've got the model. Let's say we've got the to-do item model. And then what we want to do is display it back to our browser, passing it into the form that we're going to be displaying. So we want to add an attribute of, we'll just call it to-do, and then our given to-do item that we found. And then we want to return the name of the template that we're going to be showing, which is update to-do item. Okay. Okay. So let's clean this up a little bit here. Make this a little bit easier to read. Okay. I wonder if I can... no, I'll just leave it like that. To-do item not found. Okay. So back in our view, when we in our template, sorry, when we let's go back to it. When we hit the edit button, we will be going to /edit/ID, where it's taking the ID from the current item ID, and then it will find that mapping in the controller to get mapping /edit/ID. You might be saying to yourself, we need to add a new template, and you would be right. In the resources templates folder, let's add one called update to do item HTML. Okay, so new file, update to do item HTML. So we get a blank HTML file, and let's go ahead and basically copy the top and bottom of our existing index file, because we want to use pretty much the same everything. Okay, and we'll just close this off. Div body HTML. Okay. And then everything looks okay. We're pulling in the Thymeleaf stuff. We're pulling in Bootstrap. We've got an empty container now, and what we're going to do is we're going to show a form. So what we're going to do is just give ourselves a class of call md6, a Bootstrap thing to just basically shrink the size a little bit, just so we don't have a super wide form here. We want a form, and then action equals, just give it a hash. We want a th action. So the regular form action we want to just leave alone, but we want to define a Thymeleaf action, which pretty much overrides the regular form action. And we want to ampersand. The path that we're going to be using is /todo/ID, where ID is equal to todo.id. Okay, and then the object that we're going to be referencing in this form is called to-do. And so this to-do object, this th object, sorry, not to-do object, this th object is a direct mapping back to our form controller, where we added the to-do item, we gave the to-do item that we found in the database the key name of to-do, which we are then referencing from this new form. Okay, so we've got that set up. Oh great, now my voice decides to go all crackly. Okay, hopefully that's a little bit better now. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a div. We'll call it a class of form group. Just more Bootstrap styling stuff. We're gonna use a label for description. We're gonna just display a description, and then we're gonna give ourselves an input class of form control, and then type equals text, and then th field equals splat description. And I will show you what that means, or how that will help later on. ID of description, and let's give it a placeholder, an HTML form placeholder. Add description. Okay, then we want to display a checkbox for if our to-do item is completed or not. So div class equals checkbox. Checkboxes are hard, yo. So our label, we want to input type equals checkbox. Oops, and th checked is equal to if the complete flag is set to true, then check our checkbox, otherwise leave it alone. And we want to map this back to splat complete. And we'll give our HTML form an ID of complete. Okay, and then we're going to be complete, and then we've got our end label. Okay, and then what we want to do is have a button to submit the changes. So button class equals button default, and then type equals submit. And then give ourselves an update. Whoops. Update text should go right in there. Okay. And then before the form closes, we are going to have to track, we're going to have to keep and track both the created date and modified date fields, and basically submit them back when we submit this object back to the server. We have to keep those fields along with the object. So we want to create hidden HTML form fields for those. Th field equals, and then we've got a splat created date. And then we want to do the same thing with modified date. And I will show you, it's easier to show you what happens when you don't put these in. Splat modified date. Okay. So we've got our form here. We've got we're displaying our to-do item object. And then when we want to save the necessary changes, we've got to submit, which then takes our action of to-do ID. And since we're coming from a form, this will be coming through as a post. So now what we want to do is back in our to-do item controller, now we want to create a post handler. So let's go back to our to-do item controller and see how we've got our main index here. Okay, so we'll keep that. Oops. We'll keep that, and then underneath we'll create a new post mapping annotation /to-do, and then /ID. And then this will be for updating. So let's return a string and then update to-do item. And we are using a path variable of ID, which is the ID of the to-do item that we want to update. Long ID. We use a ampersand valid annotation to it allows Spring Boot basically to do some of the model validation for us while it's being submitted through the form back through into the controller here. So binding, we need to handle a binding result and a model. Some of these you'll never have to touch, you just need to have them in your function declaration. So let's persist this. Okay, we got a path variable. Okay, valid. We want to make use of our JavaX validation. To do item is from our own model. Binding result is from validation, and our model is from our Spring Framework UI. Okay, so it's underlined all now because we haven't done anything. So okay, so if result has any errors, so if we've detected any errors in our model, then we set the ID of the given ID, and then we return an update to do item. So basically we set the errors collection, flag, array, property. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. We set the errors property, and then we return, or we call the errors, the has errors function, and then we set the ID of the to-do item back to the ID that we're trying to update, and then we actually return back to the update to-do item form to display whatever error condition there was. So otherwise we're passed, everything looks okay, there's no errors. So we call set modified date to be instant now, since we're just about to persist the save, the changes that we want to save, sorry. And let's do that right now. So to do item repository, save to do item, rock and roll, and then we want to return, and let's use a special redirect. So we want to redirect the page, we want to redirect the view back to our main index view in order to redisplay the list of what's in the database. Okay, so this was a lot of typing. Let's go ahead and test this out. And we'll see, okay. So there's two to-do items in the database. And then let's go ahead and go back to our to-do list. We'll refresh. Okay, so we now have the edit and delete buttons. So we've got our first item. Let's go ahead and hit edit. And we've got a description here. You'll notice the URL. Hopefully you can see the URL of, well, if you can't, it's /edit1 because we're editing the first item. Our description, get the milk, and we're not complete yet, so our complete box is not checked. So let's just try get the bread. Let's try updating the text and hitting the update button. And we get an error. Okay, what happened? Request method get not supported. So that means that in our form we didn't put post. So let's go back to our form, our update to do item form, sorry. And then our action, we've got our th action, our th object, but we don't have our method. Method equals post. Okay, save that. And then hopefully the server will restart. Maybe. Okay, let's go ahead and restart it. And let's go back here and let's just go back to the main index. Okay, so we've got get the milk false, blah, blah, blah. Let's hit edit. Get the milk. Let's rename that to get the bread. Hit the update button. And we now see the new description. We were redirected back to the home page where we print out get the bread instead of get the milk. And our modified date is right now. At least it should be. I think that's whatever time that is. GMT, I think it is by default. Okay, so we're on a good path. So now let's just hook up the delete button in order to delete this to-do list. Okay, so let's go back to our, so we've got in our index view, when we hit the delete button, our action is /delete/ID. So let's go back to our same item controller and or form controller, sorry. Let's go into the form controller, and then underneath the update, or the edit, sorry, update the edit get mapping. Let's add one for delete. Okay, so get mapping /delete/ID. Okay, and then let's public string delete to do item. And then we're using a ampersand path variable, of course, so same as what we've been doing this whole time. We're passing an ID around, long ID, as well as a model. Okay, and then what we want to do is to do item. Again, we want to find it, so let's just cut and paste this same code that we have up here. We want to find the to-do item, make sure it's valid, make sure it's available. Okay, and then let's to-do item repository delete to-do item, and then we want to return redirect :/. So back to our slash spot again, our slash URL again. So let's go ahead and restart the server. And then let's refresh the page. Okay, it's refreshed. And let's rake the leaves. Done. Right on. And then let's edit the first one, and then I forgot to show the case of what happens when we tick the checkbox. So we hit update, and our complete flag is now true. So back in the original demo, hooray, those initial actions worked. So let's go ahead and save that right away into Git. Let's see, update and delete forms. Okay, so we still have the add form to add a new to-do, but what we're going to do is we're going to add some class to the main form on the index page, so that if we haven't yet completed the to-do item, then it will show up as a yellow color, and if we have completed it, then it will just show up as a green. Okay, so in our th::each declaration up here, we can add a th class equals to, we'll test if the item complete flag is set, and if it is, then we'll use the success class, and if it's not, then we'll use warning. And this will add that coloring that we saw during the demo. So let's quickly verify it. Let's restart the server. And hit refresh. And there you go, it's completed, so it's now true, or it's now green, sorry, the success color. Okay, so let's go ahead and add support for adding. So what I'm going to do is underneath the table, I'm going to create another link. Let's see, how about right here? And we'll just call this button success. We'll give it a green coloring, and the href will be create to do. And then we'll just call this link or we'll give it a text of like add a to-do. Let's just do that. Okay, so we want to, now we need to create a mapping in our controller for create to do. So let's go and put that in our form controller method. Let's see, where am I? Okay, form controller. Form controller method, let's put it in the top just so it makes it easier to find. So we're going to be declaring another get mapping and / create to do. And then all we're going to be doing is, let's see, show create form to do item. Return a new form or a new HTML template called add to do item. Okay. So now in our templates folder, let's create a new file called add to do item.html. Okay. And again, just like we did with the updated to do item HTML, let's just cut and paste the first all the way up until the form, just so we get a little bit of consistency of the sizing. Okay, and then let's close off everything, and then we want to end off the body, end off the HTML, as well as add those two JavaScript files. No, we don't even need the JavaScript files. We just need the CSS, which we've already declared up here. Okay, and then so we want to add the to-do item. So now we just declare a new form with all the fields that we need. Okay, so let's give ourselves a title, add a new to-do item, and then let's create a form variable or form element, action equals hash, th action equals ampersand / to do. Basically, we want to create a new, we want to create and persist a new object. We're going to be calling this object, $, to do item, close that off, and then method equals post. Okay, so we've got our form. What happened to the end form? There we go. We've got our form. Let's create a div class equals form group. Okay, label for description. Basically give our to-do a description field. Let's see, we want to create an input class of form control, a CSS class of form control, type equals text, th : field equals splat description, and then id equals description, and placeholder equals description, something like that. Okay, and then we are in this div. And then we want to create a button, type equals submit, to submit this new to-do item. So button success, and then the button label should say add to do. Okay, so we've got a button, we add it, we click add new to-do item, we then go into this new form, and we fill out the description that we want, and then we hit the submit button, which then submits it back to /to do. So we now need to create a post to /to do. So post mapping /to do. Okay. And then what we're going to do is public string, let's just call this create to do item. Do we have a valid to do item? Binding result result, and then model, model, which should be all familiar. Okay, so if the result has errors, then return back to the form. So return add to do item. Okay, otherwise to do item set created date to be instant now, to do item set modified date to be instant now, and then we want to save it. To do item repository, save to do item, whoops, to do item, and then we want to return our special redirect slash. Okay, again, this was a lot of text typing in, so let's go ahead and test all this out. Let's see this puppy work. Okay, so let's refresh, and we've got a new add to do button here. Let's go ahead and click it. Okay. I think I know the answer to that. Let's go back to our index, and instead of the href being surrounded by the ampersand, open and close squarely brackets, because we're not actually interpolating anything in the view, we're just creating a straight link. Let's just go ahead and remove those so that we have a straight link called create to do. So let's go back to the home page, add a to do. Okay, let's add a new to do item. Let's give it a description. I'm in Canada, so let's go ahead and shovel the snow. Add a to do. And we've now got a new to do item in our list called shovel the snow. We're not complete yet, so notice how, I'm not sure if it'll come through in the video or not, but the coloring on this row is now yellow, just to let us know that we haven't completed it yet. And we've got nearly equivalent date timestamps because we're creating the two fields. And yeah, let's go back to our H2 console. Let's go ahead and refresh again. Re-log in, and then click on to do item table, and then so that we get this select star from to do item, run it, and then we get the new records. Okay, and what else do we need to do here? Okay, oh yeah, one other thing, just a special bonus. We've completed the core requirements for this application, but I came up with a bonus of just displaying the current day whenever you're using the application. So if you go back into your form controller, into the item controller, not the form controller, and into the main index page here. So let's create a new object that we add to the view. So model and view, add object, and we'll call this one just today. Call it whatever you want. Current day, day of week. I'll just leave it at today for now, and we'll create a instant now. So we'll get an instant. At zone, we'll use the current date time and the current zone of wherever you're running this from. So basically, you get your local date time, like your local time zone. Sorry, to local date, and then get day of week. Okay, so we're going to be using all that Java just to grab our current day of the week. Okay, so now we're passing that back out to the index, and let's go back to index and let's actually display it. So let's go ahead and right above our table, that's where I put it. Again, feel free to put it wherever you want. But we will be using some new Thymeleaf lingo, which is a flat pipe. So basically, if you have a sentence or set of words that you want to display in conjunction with a variable that you're persisting, or that you're passing from the controller to the view, then you have to surround that string with this pipe, this vertical bar at the end, at the beginning and end of the th text value, and that just lets the Thymeleaf processor know that you're passing in, you're basically trying to interpolate text along with what's in the variable. So let's go ahead and restart, and we should see Happy Monday. So I'll go ahead and refresh. Happy Monday. Now it's in caps, but whatever. It works. Okay, wow. So that is everything. We did quite a lot there. We've got the, oh wait, we didn't do validation. Okay. So one quick thing here, another option, or let's call this bonus. Another bonus is, let's say we don't want to allow an empty description. So right here, if we add a new to-do and we leave the description blank and we say add a to-do, then it'll go ahead and add a blank to-do item, or an item with a blank description. Okay, so we don't want to allow that. So what we want to do is we want to go back into the model, and in the description field, in the description column, we want to add an ampersand, not blank, and then a message. So a message will be what we display back when we have an error. So description is required, and then the not blank constraint is a validation helper, for lack of a better way to say it. So then back in our add to do item form in our template, what we want to do is just display any error. So underneath this input class equals form control, that placeholder thing, let's add a new span. And so if equals $, and then fields, which is another special Thymeleaf keyword. So if there's errors in the description, column object, then display the errors. So splat description. Okay. So let's go ahead and restart this, and I'll show you what happens. Okay, so let's refresh. Let's first delete that empty one, and then let's add a new to-do, and we'll leave it blank. Oh, and we now see our error message. A description is required. Because remember, back in our controller, when we try to throw, let's see, when we try a new create to-do item, if our binding result that gets passed into this controller method, if it has any errors, which it will, because we've supplied a blank description, and according to the model, we're not allowing a blank value for description. So then once it discovers that there's an error, it'll return back to the add to do item form. Let's go back to full screen me. So there we have it, everyone. In this episode, we put together a full to-do list application from start to finish using Java Spring Boot. I had a lot of fun, and it was a great time putting all this together for you. Hope you liked it. Give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more like this. And we'll see you next time. Peace, everyone. Thanks.